Hey, so I've been producing a bunch of videos on Weir's playing, and I thought, well, I really should try to say something about Garcia. But then I thought, well, what is there to say at this point? There are so many excellent videos out there, so many great musicians who've done, that put the time and the effort into creating great tabs and really saying all that needs to be said about this song and this song and this song, and some great commentary. So what do I have to offer when clearly a lot of you out there have much more talent, have better ear than me? So I thought about it for a while, and it seems like there is still room for stuff to be said at a more general or abstract level. So instead of providing tabs and an overview and how to play a particular song, I'm going to take a bit of an analytical approach and try to dissect the different components that I think go into Garcia's distinctive guitar playing. So I'm going to isolate 5 different, what I'll call, strategies for his playing, or styles, that he makes use of, and walk you through each of them and try to use that to explain what he's up to, so you can try to incorporate the Garcia feel into your soloing. Now, what makes Garcia so hard to emulate is his versatility. He's just a musical sponge. He's got all these influences. He absorbs them. He's combined them in his own creative, genius way, and it makes it very hard to emulate. And I think that's why so many people have put the time and effort into trying to figure out what he's doing. When it comes to looking for particular tabs or looking for instructions on particular songs, there are 2 great sites to go to that I'm certainly going to draw on and have benefited immensely from. One is by a fellow named Seth. His site is called GratefulGuitarLessons.com. He's got a YouTube channel as well. The other is JDarks. Great tabs, great videos. Both of them go through Weir's parts, Garcia's parts, on particular songs, and you can really learn how to play very subtle parts of lots and lots of different songs from the Dead's repertoire. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break Garcia's playing down into 5 different categories and say a little bit about each of them. Different songs have different emphasis or different weighting of these different categories, but I think the cumulative effect is, by practicing and thinking about all of these 5 different strategies, you can really get a sense of what he's doing. So the 5 that I'll go through are: 1, Garcia as blues player, blues riffer, I'll call it. 2, Garcia as melody maker, or someone creating melody lines. 3, in his role as modal player, playing with modes. 4, his use of melodic patterns, or melodic sequences as it's called. And 5, his role as what I'll call a jazz guitarist. Now that's importantly different from the modal element I'm going to talk about for reasons we'll see. I think ultimately what I'm calling the jazz guitarist is really the most important part of understanding his soloing, ironic as that may seem, because he's not in a jazz band. So I'm going to walk you through those different strategies. All right, so let's talk about Garcia and his role as blues player, blues riffer. Now, one of the things that makes playing like Garcia so hard is it's very tempting to try to assimilate his playing to other guitarists, especially when he's doing so much. He's playing really fast lines. He's got complicated stuff going on. When you're trying to get a handle on it, it's very tempting to try to pigeonhole him into a category with someone who also plays fast. Clapton's someone that comes to mind, and I'm going to use as a bit of a foil. Now, Garcia was playing some explicitly blues tunes in the early days with Pigpen, and I'm thinking of things like Next Time You See Me and It Hurts Me Too, but it shows up in later songs as well, like West LA Fadeaway. But it's important to understand some of the differences between, say, how Clapton approaches blues guitar and other blues guitarists do it, and what Garcia himself does. Right, now, Clapton is likes this kind of move. So if we're in A, here's octave A, here's your major C sharp, major third, here's your minor third C. One of the moves Clapton uses all over the place is something like this. Or just a shortened version where he moves up from the flat third to the major third. that's a move that he likes to use. Garcia actually uses a move similar to that in Next Time You See Me. But what's really importantly different is that Clapton's a genius in his own right, I think. What's special about him, I think, is that he's able to wring so much out of a pretty limited palette, if you will. And if he's just using, as he often does, the minor pentatonic, that's not a whole lot of notes to work with. Now, you could throw in some passing notes, but there's not a whole lot to work with. But him, like other great blues players, is able to extract an enormous amount of variety and is able to say a whole bunch with that very limited number of notes. One of the things that Garcia doesn't do, however, is limit himself to a small range of notes, and that's what makes playing like him difficult. One of the things he also doesn't do is, that you often will find in people like Clapton and other blues-based rock guitarists, is a repetition of a lick. Or, for instance, you won't hear Garcia really ever doing something like this. The kind of stuff that's the staple of blues-based rock guitar. When Garcia is playing in his blues-based stuff, he's using these other strategies as well that I'm going to talk about. One of the things that he does like when he's in his blues mode is he does like the flat five. So you will hear him. He also likes the little chromatic run up from the the seventh up to the octave. So often the way he turns the blues pentatonic into is really a bunch of chromatic runs. All right, so a couple things to keep in mind when thinking about him in that role. So the next one I want to turn to, and now we really start getting into core Jerry elements, is Jerry as melody maker, or as he's developing the melody line. Now one of the rare things that he actually ever said about his approach to soloing is that he said the first thing he does is he works out the melody of the song in all the different positions along the neck. Unfortunately, he didn't go on to say what the second or third or fourth, fifth thing he does is, but he does give us that hint. And that's an important part of his soloing, is that he's often relying on the actual melody, the way the verse goes, he repeats in the solo, or he plays off of it, or he modifies it. And that's something you hear in a lot of rock guitar, especially in, say, 70s rock songs. There's a lot of using a heavily distorted guitar to play the melody from the verse as part of the solo. So let me just give you an example of how you might start following a melody line, and then where you would want to add some creative combination to it, as the way Garcia does, because he doesn't just do the melody, he starts a melody and then throws in some other stuff. So just to set the stage, let's see, here's a good song to make an example of that. All right, so there you got the little start of Loser's melody line. How are you going to finish it? Well, the choice is up to you. So if you really want to try to get that part of Jerry's strategy in place, you got to go through the hard work of figuring out what the melody of the song is and learning to play it in different positions on the neck. But then, as I was saying, rarely will he play the full verse. That's pretty boring. What he often will do is, as in so many of the strategies I'm going through, he'll do a little bit of one, he'll shift to another, then he'll maybe come back to the first. So he'll play part of the melody line, then he'll embellish it, He'll modify it, he'll do some chromatic runs, some bends, but you got to have the basics in place. And that's one of the places where you can rely on the excellent tab that people have done. All right, so let's move on to the next important strategy. All right, having talked a little bit about melody, let's move on to what's called melodic patterns, or melodic sequences, as sometimes it's called. Actually, if you do a Google search for melodic patterns, you'll find a website that's got, I think, 112 different patterns. What essentially a melodic pattern is really just you take a scale and you play a couple notes in a certain pattern, and then you repeat that pattern again and again for the rest of the scale. And this is something Garcia uses in lots of different places. Sometimes he uses it kind of as a filler when he's in transition between different, say, melody lines, or when he's kind of noodling around, he uses some of this stuff. Sometimes it's just downright part of the recognizable licks from the song. So here's one that he likes to use that shows up in lots of songs. Play 3 notes down, then start with the second note and three more notes down. Then again, 1 note down, 3 more notes. So recognize it's rolling. All right, so there's one. Another one that he likes to use is going in the upwards direction. Here you could play 3 notes, then you play, you move up, and you play 3 more. Oops, sorry. And work at those at different speeds. Work at getting them faster, changing the pace as you go along. Here's another one, actually based on a song. So again, note, down, up another step, down, up step, up another step. And you can work out that sequence for the rest of the scale, up and down. So that's just something to add. There are really as many of these melodic patterns as you could think of. Something that lots of guitarists incorporated to their lead playing, something Garcia uses. That website I mentioned, Grateful Guitar Lessons, it's got a whole video just on these different kind of sequences. So it's something worth checking out. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right, so now we've got a bunch of pieces in place. We got the blues part, we got the melody lines, we got the melodic patterns. The next two really, I think, are the most important ones because they pull together the different things we've talked about so far. And that's this idea of Jerry as modal player on the one hand and also as jazz guitarist. And it's going to be important to distinguish the two. And I think this is one of the most common mistakes people make in trying to play like Jerry, is recognizing that there's something different going on in each of these. So first, Jerry as modal player. And what I mean by that is simply his use of modes. Some songs, not all songs, but some songs, he just kind of settles in to a mode, just a modification of a scale, and he works that mode, or that modified scale, for a good bit of the song, if not the whole song. So examples are things like Sugaree, I think it's B Mixolydian, Fire on the Mountain, B Mixolydian, Franklin's Tower, A Mixolydian, most famously Dark Stars, A Mixolydian. Then there are long jams where they're using sort of a modal jam. So in playing in the band, there's a long section that's a D Dorian. Here's another one where there's a long jam section. So just recognize the riff. Then it moves up to a D-Dorian, which again is just going to be the C major scale, but focusing on the D note. Now, the point of just that little exercise was to try to bring out that when he's in this modal phase, he's still drawing on the stuff we talked about. He's looking for melody lines. And a melody, in the narrow sense, is the part that you sing in the verse is the melody. But in a broader sense, melody is just a sequence of notes that forms a pleasing sound. And Jerry is a melodic player, as is Weir. So he's looking for sequences of notes that sound nice together. And what he describes himself as doing often in these long jam sessions is noodling around looking for that nice combination. And when he finds it, he sticks with it. And then he'll add some variations and he'll repeat it and he'll modify it and come back to it. So that's clearly an important part of Jerry's plan. But it's important to distinguish that reliance on modes from what we're about to do now, what I call Jerry as jazz guitarist. All right. Okay, so when I read discussion boards and people's questions and wondering about how to play like Jerry, the thing that I see over and over again that I think is probably the most common mistake is people want to ask, well, what mode is he playing? What scale is he using? Now, as we just talked about, that is important in certain songs, but that leaves out a completely different dimension of his playing, and that's arguably, I think, maybe the most important of his part of his playing, and arguably the hardest. And unfortunately, this video has gone on very, very long, so I'll say a few words about it, and if there's interest, maybe I'll generate a separate video just on this section. So what do I mean by Jerry as jazz guitarist? Well, not all jazz is modal jazz, so I don't mean a connection with modes. What I mean is something like, imagine you're a horn player, and you're playing with a piano or a guitar player that's putting out chords, and they're putting out a major chord, then a minor chord, then a dominant seventh, and then a minor seventh, and you're the horn player, and you're playing single notes. How are you going to get what you're playing to fit with the chord changes? Well, it's not just a matter of playing scales, because if you're just playing scales, you're not going to be able to capture whether the chord that's going with your playing is major or minor, or whether it's seventh, dominant seventh. What a horn player often does is, you can think of them as sketching or providing the outline of the chord. They hit what you could call the guiding tones. That is, the key notes that distinguish the chord from others. The root obviously is important. Whether the note is a major third or a flattened third, whether it's a 5 or whether the 5 is diminished, whether it's a 7 or whether it's a flat 7, all of those things are in mind for the jazz horn player and also for the jazz guitarist as well, providing in their playing, soloing that's playing through the changes is one of the phrases that gets used. And that's something that Jerry is extremely, extremely sensitive to. So even when he's stuck on just one scale, he makes a point of making sure that he's hitting the various notes that highlight what chord is being played at that time. So if the progression moves from, I don't know, a C to a G, you're going to find his soloing reflecting that. Now, a simple way to do it would be just like the way a crude bass player does it. When the C is played, you hit the root C. When the G is played, you hit the root G. But he's much more sophisticated than that. He highlights, often, the full chord. He makes contact with the 1, the 3 or the flat 3, the 5, the 7 or the flat 7, depending on what chord it is. That is one of the things that's crucial. So sometimes people say, Jerry isn't really concerned with scales. What he did was he thought about the chord, and he thought about what notes in the chord work. And I think that's one of the most important things to his playing, but it's also one of the hardest things to do. It's much easier to just hunker down in a scale and just zip all over the place once you've learned the pattern up and down the neck. It's much harder to be able to play through the changes. That's one of the things he's so good at. Some songs, the solos, it's really clear that he's doing that. Deal is a great example of his playing through the changes. There are other songs as well that come to mind. Jack Straw is one that he does an excellent job of keeping track of the chord changes. He also does it in, at least in the chorus of They Love Each Other. So that's something to keep in mind when you're practicing. Now, one way to start doing that is just working with arpeggios. Play along with a rhythm track and just arpeggiate the chords. Then, once you get comfortable with the rhythm and the timing, work on elaborating a little bit. So hitting not just the 1, 3, and 5, say, of a chord, but throw in some extra licks. Be expansive. Throw in some chromatic runs. Throw in some of those melodic patterns. But the idea, again, is making sure that you keep touch with the chords that are being played. That's something that requires a lot of practice. But if you're doing that, and you're keeping all the other stuff we've talked about, then you're on the path to playing like Jerry. So I hope this has been of some use, this kind of analytical assessment of his playing. And as I said, maybe I'll try to generate a video that shows this playing through the changes in action. All right, take it easy.